Hi everybody, it's Courtney and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be using the Flora background stamp by Simon Says Stamp, and I'm going to be creating a Christmas card with it, even though this is not a Christmas background stamp. So I have a piece of Neenah Solar White and I'm cutting out 2 strips of masking paper, and this is the Masking Magic masking paper by Gina K Designs. And you'll notice that my card panel, which is Neenah Solar White, is a lot larger than an A2 size card, but it will be an A2 size card. I just cut this panel a little bit larger because I know I'm going to have to trim it down so that it fits nicely in my MISTI with that background stamp. You know how the background stamps don't always fit right to the corner. So I'm just placing down my masks, one on the top and one kind of towards the bottom, but more in the middle. And I'm going to put a little bit of Tombow Mono multi glue and smear that with my finger, let that dry, and then it becomes repositionable. I did fold the edges of my masks or strips of masking paper back just on one side so that this fits perfectly in the corner of my MISTI. Going to go ahead and lay down my background stamp, and the first time around I am just going to stamp this out with Blackout ink by Ink on 3 because it's a Copic safe ink and I'm not worried about getting a great impression. All I need to do is to be able to see the images. Once I have this stamped, I'm going to go ahead and clean off my stamp, but I'm going to leave my stamp in my MISTI because we're going to be stamping this again afterwards. So we're going to start, we're going to move on to the Copic coloring, and I'm not going to show you all of it because I pretty much just did the same thing over and over. But I'm going to start off with the greens, and I'm going to start off with the, I guess you could consider it the background. So anything that's not the flowers. So I'm going to saturate each little section with my G43, which is my lightest color. Then I'm going to add my shadows with the G99, and I'm just picking a random light source being in the top right, but you can do anything you want as long as your shadows are consistent. So my shadows are going to be to the bottom left. Then I'm going to blend those shadows out a little bit with the G94 and then finish off again with that G43 and just get all of these greens to blend nicely together. Now you can do all of the background all at one time if you prefer. For me, that doesn't really work out that great. So I like to work in little sections at a time so I can kind of keep track of what I'm doing and where my shadows need to be, where my flowers are, and things like that. Now I do have the masking paper still down, and this can take some ink, but you don't want to color too much over it because it's not going to take as much ink as regular ink like Distress ink or regular dye ink or anything like that. Being I'm using alcohol markers, it is going to seep through a little bit if I oversaturate it. So I continued on with these 3 greens throughout the entire little area here, I guess you could say, and just completed all of the background. Then we will move on to the flowers themselves. And again, I'm not going to show you all of them. I colored them all the same exact way. But I'm going to use the same red combination I always use for Christmas, and I'm going to start off with my lightest color, which is the R22, and I'm just going to get that paper saturated a little bit towards the base of the little flower there. Then I'm going to move on to the R89 and just add a little bit of shading towards the base and where I guess you could consider them petals, where they kind of overlap one another. I'm just going in with a straight line, or well, the line of the image, and I'm just creating a little bit of a shadow there. And you'll see that when especially with my darkest color, I went in with just the tip of my marker. You'll notice that when I go in with that darkest color, my marker is almost straight up and down, and that's how you're going to get into those little areas and add a very minimal amount of ink down. So I blended all of those areas out with the R46, now moving on to the R24, and then I'll move back to that R22 to kind of get everything to blend, and this will be my highlight color. Again, I'm trying to be careful not to go over that masking paper too much, and I'm also being careful not to go out of the lines too much because once that red gets on that green, you're not going to be able to get it up. So I'm going to show you one more flower here. I colored this pretty much the same way with the exception of the shadow. Because this flower is behind that other flower, there's going to be a shadow on it. So I put in my shadows where one petal's under another, and I also created a shadow just basically outlining that other one. And I'm just going to go ahead and extend those out with the same reds as I always did, including that shadow from that other flower. Finishing off again with the R24 and then the R22, and I went over the entire area here that we have stamped and colored in all of my flowers the same way. So once my coloring was done, I am going to go ahead and line this back up into my MISTI. And here's where I got a little nervous because it's a background stamp and it's very hard to line those back up. So I was just praying at this point. I'm treating my card panel here with my anti-static tool. Then I'm going to use the clear embossing ink by Simon Says Stamp. This is kind of like a Versamark. But it's not, the ink pad itself isn't as squishy, but it works the same way. So I did go ahead and stamp this out twice just because it is clear sticky ink and you can't exactly see where you've stamped, especially being my background is all colored. So I stamped this twice just to be sure. Next, I removed this from my MISTI and I want there to be an edge around my little strip, I guess you could call it. And so I'm going to bring out an Emboss It pen, and this is by Ranger. You can also use a Versamarker, which is pretty much the same thing. And I'm just going to go along the lines of that masking paper. So part of the nib or tip of the pen is on the masking paper, and the other part is on the card panel itself, just to hopefully, at this point, get a straight line and an even line. But until I sprinkle on the embossing powder and heat set it, at this point, I'm praying and hoping that everything lined up right. So I went ahead and sprinkled on my embossing powder, and now I can go ahead and remove the masks. I did not remove the masks first because they may leave behind a sticky residue, and I didn't want my embossing powder to stick to areas that I didn't want it to stick to. So I'm going to carefully remove that masking paper, and I have my heat gun heating up on the side for about 30 or 45 seconds or so before bringing that to the paper. And then I can go ahead and heat set that. And now metallic embossing powder is very easy to use because you can clearly see it change. So it was very easy to see and make sure that everything is heated up. And I was very, very happy that everything worked out. However, I did have some areas where my Copics kind of bled through that mask. So that line that we had drawn with the Emboss It pen didn't really match up well. So I'm just going to make it a little bit thicker. I'm going to bring out my T-square ruler and I'm going to go over those lines a little bit and just make them a little bit thicker and kind of cover up those areas that it bled through. Now at this point, once I drew in these lines, I realized I didn't bring back out my anti-static tool. And this is where my masks were. So I probably have some residue. So I'm being careful not to sprinkle on too much embossing powder and kind of just leaving that right where I need it to be. But I still did have quite a bit left over on the card panel where my masks were and where I failed to treat the panel with my anti-static tool. So I'm just taking a dry paintbrush and taking off as much as I possibly can. But at this point in the game, I'm not going to let a few specks of embossing powder stop me. This is almost done and I'm going to continue. So once I had a majority of it removed, at least a majority, I'm going to go ahead and heat set that again. And you can see that this covers up all of the areas that my markers kind of bled through that masking paper. So next I'm going to go ahead and trim down my panel to a little bit smaller than an A2 size card because I want a little bit of a border. Oh, first I did fix up some of those areas with just a gold white gel, or gold, not a gold white gel pen, just a gold gel pen. And nobody will ever notice if your embossing isn't perfect. So now I'm trimming this down and I'm trimming it down on both sides to kind of cut off some of that messy area that kind of gets on your edges, and also a little bit on the top and the bottom just to make everything still even. And next we're going to move on to the sentiment, and I just took a sentiment, just a simple Merry Christmas sentiment, and this is from the Naughty and Nice Elves set, but you could use any sentiment here. Again, treated it with my anti-static tool, stamping that with the embossing ink, sprinkling on that gold embossing powder, and heat setting that, making sure that my heat gun is heated up, because as you can see, even though I heat up my heat gun, my paper still did get pretty warped. So I'm going to take a piece of fun foam that is cut just a little bit smaller than my card panel, stick that onto one side and add some Tombow Mono multi glue on the other, and stick that down onto a A2 size note card, just leaving a small white border on all four sides. Finished off with a few Nuvo Dream Drops, and these are the gold ones, which I wish I would have left out, but it is what it is. But that is it, guys. I will leave all of the supplies listed in the description box below. Thank you for stopping by, and have a great day. Bye.